How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday. Yom Hamishi. Oy. Let's light up the darkness. Well, I should be a little more modest. Okay, who's in the house on a Thursday? Yehud in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Renee in Indiana, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Nancy, North Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Shandora in the Bronx, Belle in Texas, Renee in Indiana, choosing AT over the rest of the Dodgers home opener. Whoa, that's love. Are we winning? I hope we're winning. Us being the Dodgers. Sharon in New Jersey, Lucy in Minnesota. Hi, I'm in Florida. Yitzchak in Minnesota. James in Indianapolis. Refuah Shlema. Marie in Freeport, New York. Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. All kinds of good stuff happening. The latest is new screening just announced in Boston. If you're in Boston, April 7th at Harvard, my alma mater. April 7th at 7:30 p.m., Seaver Hall, room 113. DM us if you want to come, and we'll get your name on the guest list. You have to be on the list to be admitted, but we will be happy to add you to the list. Okay, and that's Guns N' Moses, in case you're new. Our movie, Nina and I wrote, I directed, Guns N' Moses, opening in theaters across America this summer. But sneak preview screening at Harvard, Monday, April 7th, and I will be there for the Q&A. Okay, we are on page 88 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of chapter 10, Mishnah number 4. Now, this is the death penalty of strangulation for the rebellious elder, who's essentially one of the sages, an ordained rabbi. In ancient times, that was more than just a rabbi. That was a rabbi who was qualified to make halachic rulings on behalf of the nation, who disagreed with his fellow sages, which is fine. We see that there's minority opinions that disagree with the majority all the time. But the minority realize that they've been overruled, and they don't then encourage the people to follow their own minority ruling and contravene the law established by the sages as the law. So once the sages say this is the law, we're obligated to follow it. If we don't follow it, it's a sin. In fact, it's a sin that's for the intentional violation of it is a flogging offense. So the Torah says that this rebellious elder, right, a sage who not only contradicts the other sages, but then incites the people to follow his own ruling, which has been overruled by the other sages, this is a death penalty offense. However, again, the sage is always so reluctant to, a rabbinic court so reluctant to actually issue a death penalty, very difficult to meet these requirements. Now, Rabbi Meir said that one of the requirements for this death penalty to apply is that the matter, the particular law about which this rebellious elder disagrees with the other sages itself has to be a death penalty offense. Now, it doesn't have to be death penalty at the hands of an earthly court, sufficient that it would be death penalty at the hands of the heavenly court, known as excision, or in Hebrew, kares, a kares-bearing penalty. If you violate it intentionally, heaven will take care of you. We're not sure exactly what kares means, but some kind of shortened life, or possibly losing your portion in the world to come, or some part of your portion. Not good. Definitely not good. That's for the intentional violation of such a law. And if a person does it unwittingly, so laws that for the intentional violation, the punishment is kares, the unwitting violation is the obligation to bring a sin offering when the temple is standing. It hasn't in 2,000 years, so we would pray and ask forgiveness as an atonement. But when the temple is standing, when you violate such a law unwittingly, you'd be obligated to bring a sin offering. So says Rabbi Meir, the type of matter in which this sage, this elder, is disagreeing with his fellow sages, especially of the Sanhedrin, is a serious matter. That's opposed to the other opinion that we saw here, that no, it's any matter that he disagrees with them and is trying to undermine the authority of the sages could result in a death penalty. But we've been proving that all of the matters listed here are in keeping with Rabbi Meir's requirement that it would be a kares-bearing penalty. And we've been going at length showing that each of the types of laws that were mentioned in our Mishna, that this elder would disagree with the other sages, is a kares-bearing penalty, because often it doesn't seem like a kares-bearing penalty on its face, but it could result in a kares-bearing penalty if someone were to follow the law as dictated by this rebellious elder. So we continue near the top of page 88a, maybe a quarter of the way down. So other kinds of laws, right, that would lead to a kares-bearing penalty. Disputes. This is the giving of the bitter waters to a sota, the suspected adulteress, to drink, and the heifer whose neck is broken, and the purification of a metzora. In the case of giving the bitter waters to a sota to drink, the dispute concerning such a prohibition is with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, as we learned in a Mishna and tractate Sota, with regard to one who issues a warning to his wife not to seclude herself with a particular man. Rabbi Eliezer says he issues the warning to her based on the presence of two witnesses. Only then is the warning effective. And the husband gives her the bitter waters based on the testimony of one witness who saw the seclusion, or even based on his own testimony. So Rabbi Yehoshua says he both issues a warning to her based on the presence of two witnesses and gives her the bitter waters to drink based on the testimony of two witnesses to the seclusion. So if the seclusion took place in the presence of one witness, according to Rabbi Eliezer, she is a sota, and she's not entitled to receive payment of her marriage contract. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, she's not a sota, and she would be entitled to receive payment of her marriage contract. So the difference is whether the money of her marriage contract actually belongs to her or not. According to one sage, yes. According to the other, no. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, If she gave that money to another person who then used it to betroth a woman, then that betrothal would be a betrothal with stolen property. And so that betrothal would not take effect. She would not be betrothed. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, the betrothal would not take effect. And the woman is not betrothed. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, there's a misprint here because they're both saying that the betrothal would not take effect. But the point is that the betrothal would take effect according to one, it would not take effect according to the other. And as we saw yesterday in all these kinds of cases, that then if somebody had sexual relations with that woman, if she was betrothed, then it's a kares bearing of, then it's a death penalty offense. And if she's not, it's not. So that's where kares would come into this. Next case. In the case of the heifer whose neck is broken, which is the ritual when a murder victim is found, between towns, and we're going to measure which is the closest town. Sanhedrin comes out from Jerusalem, and they do the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken, according to Torah. So the dispute in such a prohibition is with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. As we learned in the Mishna, tractate Sota, page 45, from where on the body of the murder victim would they measure the distance to determine which city is closest? Rabbi Eliezer says from the belly button. Rabbi Akiva says from his nose. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says from the place where he became a slain person, which is from his neck. So according to all these Tanaim, if the corpse was measured from a place on the body other than the place prescribed, the heifer is not consecrated for its purpose because the ritual was done wrong. So according to Rabbi Akiva, if the measurement was taken from his navel and the heifer is not consecrated for its purpose, while according to Rabbi Eliezer, it is consecrated for its purpose. And this has clear ramifications with regard to a situation in which one attempts to betroth a woman with that heifer. Again, when is this going to come up? But the point is that we're able to create a situation where, according to one view of the law, a betrothal took effect. According to another view of the law, the betrothal does not take effect. And then if someone sleeps with that woman, kares according to one, not kares according to the other. In the case of the purification of a metzora, the dispute concerning such a prohibition is with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. As we learned in a Mishna, tractate Negayim 14:9, if a metzora does not have a thumb or a big toe or a right ear, upon which the Torah says that blood and oil must be placed as part of the purification process of a metzora, so he has no possibility of purification forever. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, the priest places the blood and oil for him on its place, i.e. where those body parts would have been if they were intact, and thereby he fulfills his obligation. Rabbi Shimon says the priest places the blood and oil on his left thumb, toe, and ear, and he fulfills his obligation. Both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon maintain that it is possible to purify such a metzora, who would then not be liable to be punished with kares if he were to enter the temple. The rabbis who maintain that such a metzora has no possibility of purification hold that if he enters the temple, he is liable to be punished with kares. Therefore, kares-bearing penalty based on this dispute between one sage and another. Next issue, in your gates. This is gleanings, forgotten sheaves, and produce in the corner of the field. All these are for the poor. In the case of gleanings, the dispute concerning such a prohibition, as we learned in a Mishna, Peah 6:5, two stalks that were not cut with the sheaves and are then found in a field by a poor person are gleanings and belong to the poor person. 3 stalks are not gleanings, and the owner of the field can take them if he chooses. So in the case of forgotten sheaves, the same Mishnah teaches that if you forgot 2 sheaves, they are forgotten sheaves and belong to the poor. But if you forgot 3 or more bundles, they are not considered forgotten sheaves and they belong to the owner of the field. And with regard to all of them, Beis Shammai say, if there are 3, it belongs to a poor person. If there are 4, it stays with the owner. According to Beis Hillel, if a poor person took 3 stalks or sheaves, they do not belong to him. And if he betrothed the woman with them, the betrothal does not take effect. According to Beis Shammai, she is betrothed, and then the same dilemma repeats itself. In the case of Peah, the produce left in the corner of a field, the dispute concerning such a prohibition is with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and the rabbis. As we learned in a Baraisa, the mitzvah of Peah is to designate it from the standing grain still growing from the ground. If he did not designate it from the standing grain, but reaped the entire field, he designates a portion from the sheaves as peah. If he did not designate it from the sheaves, then he designates it from the pile where one places the kernels after threshing, before he smooths the pile, at which point the produce is considered grain from which one is obligated to take terumas and tithe. If he already smoothed the pile before designating peah, he tides the grain in the pile, and then he gives peah to the poor. If he ground the kernels into flour, now it's too late to designate peah. So in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, they said, one designates peah even from the dough. If a poor person takes peah from the dough and betroths a woman with the dough, according to the rabbis, the betrothal would not take effect. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, the betrothal would take effect. And then we repeat the same kind of dilemma. Okay, that's all the cases that show that according to Rabbi Meir, the kind of dispute that would result in a rebellious elder actually receiving the death penalty, it would have to be he disagrees with the other sages in a death penalty matter, at least at the level of Karas. Now we're going back to the sort of appellate system of the rabbinic courts in ancient Israel. The Mishnah teaches there were 3 courts there in Jerusalem. And the Mishnah then details the procedure followed when a rebellious elder appeared before these courts. So Rav Kahana says, if the rebellious elder says his ruling, right, he's going to rule on a matter of law, and it's going to end up being a different ruling than the rest of the sages. Okay, but what's his motivation? What is his source for his ruling? So if the rebellious elder says his ruling on the basis of the tradition that he received from his teacher, and the members of the court who disagree with him say their ruling on the basis of the tradition they received from their teachers, in this case, the rebellious elder is not executed because he has a legitimate basis for his ruling. If the rebellious elder says, this is the correct understanding in my eyes, and he does not claim that his ruling is based on tradition, and the members of the court say this is the correct understanding in our eyes, then again he is not executed because it's his understanding versus the understanding of the others. And all the more so if he says his ruling on the basis of a tradition that he received, and the members of the court say this is the correct understanding of the law in our eyes, not based on a tradition. He would not be executed. He's not executed unless he flouts tradition on the basis of his own understanding. And he says, this is the correct understanding in my eyes. And the members of the court say, well, our ruling, the majority ruling, is based on a tradition that we received from our elders. That's when the death penalty for the rebellious elder would apply. And know that this is so, as Akavia ben Mahalalel was not executed despite the fact that he ruled contrary to the consensus ruling of his contemporaries, because he based his ruling on a tradition that he received from his rabbi, from his teacher. And Rabbi Elazar says, even the rebellious elder says his ruling on the basis of the even if the rebellious elder says his ruling on the basis of the tradition, and the members of the court say this is the correct understanding in our eyes, right? So he has a tradition to rely on. The majority are just saying, well, no, we're using our reason. We figured it out just based on reason. So this case was explicitly said by the majority would not trigger the death penalty for the rebellious elder. But Rabbi Elazar's opinion is, yes, it would. Even if the rebellious elder has a tradition to lean on and the rest of the court is using their own understanding without a tradition, if that's the subject of the dispute, and of course the rebellious elder then incited members of the population to follow his ruling and ignore the ruling of the majority, he would qualify for the death penalty. Why? Why does Rabbi Elazar disagree with the majority on this issue? He disagrees because so that discord will not proliferate among Israel and to ensure that there will be a standard halachic ruling. We can't have sages just dictating their own laws for their little parts of the population. There needs to be a standard, this is the law for the Jewish people. And if you say, well, for what reason was Akavia ben Mahalalel not executed? It is due to the fact that he did not issue his ruling as practical halacha. He merely claimed that his understanding was correct in theory, which is always permitted. A sage can disagree with the other sages. He just can't incite the Jewish people to follow his teaching and ignore the majority, which has now become the law. We learned in the Mishna that the rebellious elder says, this is what I interpreted, and that is what my colleagues interpreted. This is what I taught, and that is what my colleagues taught. And the Gemara asks, well, what? Is it not including a case where he says his ruling on the basis of the tradition, and the members of the court say, this is the correct understanding in our eyes, as we just said? And the Gemara rejects this. No. The reference in our Mishnah is to a case where he says, this is the correct understanding in my eyes, and the members of the court say they're ruling on the basis of the tradition, which is what we just read above. That's how we are to understand the Mishnah. Now, coming here a proof from that which Rabbi Yoshia says. There are three matters that Zeira, one of the residents of Jerusalem, said to me. The first is that in the case of a husband who, after warning his wife not to enter seclusion with a certain man, retracted his warning, then in that case, his warning is retracted. And if she enters into seclusion with that man, she would not be rendered a sota, right? She would not be rendered a suspected adulteress who from that moment on is prohibited to her husband. And then they either have to divorce or go down to Jerusalem and she drinks the bitter waters to prove her innocence, that she never, cheated on him. But until then, she would be prohibited to him. That's if, he heard that she had secluded herself with somebody and then warned her, do not seclude yourself again with that man. The warning was in front of witnesses. And then she secluded herself with that man in front of witnesses. Then she would become the sota. But what we're learning here is if the husband warned her, but then he retracted his warning, then it's like she was not warned. So she cannot become a sota. The second matter is that in the case of a stubborn and rebellious son whose father and mother sought to forgive him for his gluttonous and drunken conduct and decided not to bring him to court, they can forgive him. And the third is that of the case of the rebellious elder whom his court sought to forgive for his deviation from their ruling. They can forgive him. And when I came to my colleagues in the South with regard to two of the cases, they agreed with me, right? That the husband can retract his warning to his wife, and the parents of the metzora umore, the glutton and rebellious son, they can retract their warning to him, and they can forgive him for his conduct. But the rebellious elder, who's been charged by his court that he deviates from as being a rebellious elder, they can't retract that charge. But with regard to the rebellious elder, they did not agree with me. Why? So that discord would not proliferate in Israel. We need consistent rulings. We can't have these rebellious elders just starting their own religion, essentially. And this supports the opinion of Rabbi Elazar and is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Kahana, and that is the law. It is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yosei said, excuse me, I never do this, but I've been so busy like crazy today. I just didn't eat today, and I got to get some calories of little broth. I have ramen in there that I'm not going to make you watch me eat. Just a little drink of broth. Okay. It is taught in Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei said, we are on page 88b. Initially, discord would not proliferate among Israel. Rather, the court of 71 judges, the great Sanhedrin, would sit in the chamber of hewn stone, the seat of its authority in the temple complex. And there were two additional courts, each consisting of 23 judges. One would convene at the entrance to the Temple Mount, and one would convene at the entrance to the temple courtyard. And all the other courts, consisting of 23 judges, would convene in all cities inhabited by the Jewish people. If the matter was unclear and it was necessary to ask and clarify it, those uncertain of the law would ask the court that is in their city. Right? A court of 3 locally would go to the high court of that city, the court of 23 in that city. If they couldn't get an answer, then they would send to Jerusalem. And if not, they would come to a court that is adjacent to their city. Okay, so first a neighboring court of 23. If the members of the court heard a clear halakhic ruling, wait a minute. if the members of the court heard a clear halachic ruling with regard to the matter, they said it to them. Right? In other words, if one of their members issued a clear halachic ruling, then and everyone said like, yeah, that's the law. Great. Now they would say, well, this is the law, and you guys, that guy's wrong, and this is the law. But if people were not sure, none of the members of this court were sure, that's when they go to a higher court. So if they heard a clear halachic ruling with regard to that matter, they said it to them. And if not, they would come to the court at the entrance of the Temple Mount. If the members of the court heard a clear halachic ruling within them with regard to that matter, then they would say it to the people who had come for an answer. And if not, they would come to the court at the entrance of the temple courtyard. And the elder whose ruling deviated from the ruling of his colleagues says, this is what I interpreted, and that is what my colleagues interpreted. This is what I taught, and this is what my colleagues taught. So if the members of the court heard a clear halachic ruling with regard to that matter, they said it to them. Oh, in other words, the ones who are coming, right, the rebellious elder says how he sees the law, and then the court that he's, disagreeing with, they say, this is what we believe the law is. So now if this high court in Jerusalem says, okay, well, this is what the law is, either the elder got it right or the greater court got it right, and they tell them. But if they haven't heard a clear halachic ruling, and it's not clear who is right between these two opinions, that's when they have to bounce it up to a higher level. So if the members of the court heard a clear halachic ruling with regard to the matter, they said it to them. And if not, these judges and those judges would come to the chamber of hewn stone, the great Sanhedrin, where the great Sanhedrin would be convened from the time that the daily morning offering is sacrificed, which was just before sunrise, until the time that the daily afternoon offering is sacrificed, kind of mid to late afternoon. That's how much of the day the court was in session. And on Shabbatot, right, on Shabbos, and festivals, when court is not in session, the members of the court would sit at the rampart. And when a question was asked before them, if the members of the court heard a clear halachic ruling with regard to the matter, they would say it to them. And if not, they would stand for a vote on the matter. If the judges who deemed the item in question ritually impure outnumbered those who deemed it pure, the court would deem the item impure. If the judges who deemed the item in question ritually pure outnumbered those who deemed it impure, the court would deem the item pure. Right? So that's the difference. This is the court of last resort, the great Sanhedrin. Now you don't just wait till everyone agrees we've heard a clear halachic ruling. Now we need a ruling, even if it's not clear. So that's why the Sanhedrin votes. And then whatever the vote comes out of the great Sanhedrin, that's the law. And we establish that as the law for the Jewish people. And now if the rebellious elder is going to disagree with the ruling of the great Sanhedrin, that's when he becomes a rebellious elder, if he then furthermore goes and incites people to follow his ruling, not that of the great Sanhedrin. Now, that was the system so that there would not be discord in Israel. And that was the system with regard to rebellious elders. And the system was working. There was one body issuing the law. But a problem arose. From the time that the disciples of Shammai and Hillel grew in number, and they were disciples who did not attend to their masters to the requisite degree, dispute proliferated among the Jewish people, and the Torah became like two Torahs. This is exactly what the law of the rebellious elder was designed to avoid. Right? You don't want to have two systems of law that the Jewish people are following and they have to figure out which one to follow. This will split the Jewish people. Now, of course, we have, different kinds of denominations. We have different kinds of groups, differences like Ashkenaz and Sephardic, and other kinds of differences like that among the Jewish people. And generally speaking, that's unfortunate. But for the most part, those differences are really only about custom. This is differences in law. So here we have Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the followers of the great sage Hillel and the followers of the great sage Shammai. Hillel and Shammai themselves disagreed on very little, and they were just relatively small matters. But their students started to veer off and basically say, no, actually, that other side has it totally wrong on important matters, and vice versa. And this was becoming a massive problem for the Jewish people, a schism, like a civil war. It never came to actual war, but halachically, it was a major problem. And it was like, right, the Jewish people, dispute proliferated among the Jewish people, and the Torah became like two Torahs. Two disparate systems of halacha developed, and there was no longer a halachic consensus with regard to every matter. And the Baraisa continues its discussion of the workings of the Sanhedrin. Now, it's interesting. We're just going to leave that story like that. The nation split, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and then what? We're actually going to go back to the workings of the courts. But we've seen elsewhere, and we saw this in Eruvin 13, that this division got worse and worse and worse until a voice emerged from heaven, a heavenly voice, a baskol, and said, these and these are the words of the living God. Right? It's not that the two systems where one was corrupt and one was honest, or one was smart and one was dumb. Both were coming to conclusions that were true and well thought out, but contradicted each other. So what to do? You got to have a unified system. So the heavenly voice said, these and these are the words of the living God, but the law follows Beis Hillel. And as we've said many times, why? The Baskol gave the reason. Because the students of Hillel, Beis Hillel, are easy and foregoing, and they state the opinions of their opponents before their own. Right? So it was the manner of reaching the truth that made the difference. That's how important civil discourse and understanding the opinion and stating it without prejudice, the opinion of your opponents, will lead you to more truthful places. How do we know that? Because God said so. Okay. Through the Baskol. Okay. Let's keep going. So the Baraisa continues its discussion of the workings of the Sanhedrin. So from there, the Sanhedrin writes, after the Sanhedrin votes on a particular law, the Sanhedrin writes and dispatches the following statement to all places. Anyone who is wise and humble, and the minds of people are at ease with him, shall be a judge in his city. If he is successful in his city, from there they promote him to the court at the entrance of the Temple Mount, if there's a vacant seat on the court. And from there they promote him to the court at the entrance to the temple courtyard. And from there, the court in the chamber of hewn stone. Right? So who are the judges that ultimately get to serve on the Sanhedrin? Who rose through the system? Wise, humble. And the minds of the people are at ease with him. Wise, okay, good requirement for a judge. Humble, which we learned from Moses, the most humble man who ever lived, and the greatest prophet who ever lived. And the minds of the people are at ease with him. Consensus, that's a good judge. Not half the people think he's a good judge, half the people can't stand him. We're not going to make him a judge. There has to be a consensus that this is a good judge. Apropos the appointment of judges, the Gemara relates, they sent the following statement from there, from Babel, to Eretz Yisrael. Who is the one destined to receive a place in the world to come? It is one who is modest and humble, who bows and enters and bows and exits, and who studies Torah regularly, and who does not take credit for himself. The sages cast their eyes on Rab Ula bar Abba as they perceived him as the embodiment of all these characteristics. How important is modesty and humility? Being arrogant can cause you to lose your place in the world to come. The Mishnah teaches, if the rebellious elder returned to his city and he taught in the manner that he was teaching previously, that does not trigger the death penalty. He's still exempt from punishment. Unless he instructs others to act on the basis of his ruling that deviates from the statement of the Sanhedrin. The sages taught he is not liable unless he acts in accordance with his ruling, or he instructs others and they act in accordance with his ruling. Right? So even if he doesn't incite others to follow his minority opinion, but he himself follows his own minority opinion and doesn't follow the law set out by the sages, that would trigger the death penalty offense because he's a sage and people view his behavior as a model for them to follow. The Gemara challenges. Well, granted, if he instructs others and they act in accordance with his ruling, there is a novel element in the fact that he is liable to be executed, as initially, before he was deemed a rebellious elder, he is not liable to receive the death penalty for instructing others to perform the transgression, and now he is to receive the death penalty. But if he just himself acts in accordance with his ruling, well, initially, before he was deemed a rebellious elder, he is also liable to receive the death penalty for performing that action, which we've now established is contrary to the law of the sages and can result in charis, right? That's why we went through that whole proof. Now, the Gemara clarifies the difficulty. This works out well in a case where he ruled with regard to forbidden fat and blood, as initially he would not have been liable to receive the death penalty. Rather, he would have been liable to receive charis, and now he is liable to receive the death penalty. But in a case where he ruled with regard to a transgression, for which one is liable to receive a court-imposed death penalty initially, he is also liable to receive the death penalty court-imposed now. So what changed? And the Gemara explains there is a novel element even in a case where he acts in accordance with his ruling, as initially before he is deemed a rebellious elder, he requires forewarning in order to be executed. Now, he does not require forewarning in order to be executed. And the Gemara asks if the rebellious elder's ruling was with regard to one who instigates others to engage in idol worship, who does not require forewarning, then what is there to say? Both before and after he is deemed a rebellious elder, he is executed without forewarning. So the Gemara answers, initially before the rebellious elder ruled that instigating others to engage in idol worship is permitted, if after he instigated others, he stated a reason why he thought that it is permitted, we accept his explanation from him and exempt him. Now, after he issued the divergent ruling, if he stated a reason, we do not accept the explanation from him, since he already indicated that he holds that instigating others to engage in idol worship, incitement, is permitted, and that is the reason that he engaged in instigation, so now we execute him. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 10. Now, Mishnah number 5. With regard to the rulings of the rebellious elder, the Mishnah states, there is greater stringency with regard to traditional rabbinic interpretations of the Torah than with regard to matters of Torah. Right? A law that's explicitly written in the Torah, obviously we're obligated to follow it, and a decree issued by the sages, generally speaking, as a fence around the Torah to keep us from violating written laws in the Torah. We are obligated to follow that law and prohibited to ignore that law. So what are they saying? There's a greater stringency attached to rabbinic enactments, rabbinic decrees, than there is to written Torah laws. Why? Because everyone knows that written Torah laws were written by Moses, taking dictation from God, and they're in the Torah, which has survived for thousands of years. You don't have to convince anyone that that's the law. A decree of the sages, right, comes from the oral tradition and the oral system commenced by Moses at Mount Sinai and passed down through the generations. But, human nature being human nature, people will say, well, where's it written that I have to do this or I have to do that? What they mean is, well, it's not written in the Torah. You're just telling me that the sages said so. Well, I don't hold by the sages. That was the position of the Sadducees and of the Samaritans, right? Now, that's an illegal position, but it exists. And so the rabbinic ordinances actually required a little bit of extra enforceability and strength. And that's why there's going to be a greater stringency attached to them. There is a greater stringency with regard to traditional rabbinic interpretations of the Torah than with regard to matters of the Torah itself. If one states there is no commandment to wrap tefillin, and his intention is in order to have others violate matters of Torah, so he is exempt from punishment as a rebellious elder. That would not be a statement of a rebellious elder, because everyone knows that we are commanded to wrap tefillin. Now, it's interesting because this particular commandment, it's not so clear that it is in the written Torah. In the written Torah, it says You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and resources. And these words which I command you on this day shall be in your heart. You shall teach them faithfully to your children. Speak of them sitting in your house when you walk by the way. When you lie down and when you rise up, you'll bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be a symbol before your eyes. That's the commandment of tefillin. So that is written in the Torah. How do we know it's a black box with leather straps? That's rabbinic, right? But the fact that you will bind these words on as a sign on your hand and they shall be a symbol before your eyes is in the written Torah. So someone says it's not in the Torah, you don't have to do it. That's not even the ruling of a sage. That's just nonsense. So we don't execute him for that because everyone could instantly see that that's nonsense. So he is exempt from punishment, the punishment of a rebellious elder. One who disputes matters written explicitly in the Torah is not considered an elder at all, nor a Torah scholar, and therefore he cannot assume the status of a rebellious elder. If, however, he disputed a matter based on rabbinic tradition, for example, he stated that there should be 5 compartments in the tefillin, which instead have 4, right? The black box of tefillin has 4 parchments from the Torah, or 4 verses from the Torah written in them. And how do we know that it had to be 4 compartments? That's derived by our sages. So if this guy comes along and says, no, you should do 5 compartments. Now he's changing a matter of rabbinic ordinance, rabbinic law, interpretation of the Torah. For him to make such a statement, that's the kind of statement a sage would make. He can argue and have all the proofs in the world, but he's contradicting the word of the Sanhedrin, of the tradition, etc. So if he tells people to go make their tefillin with 5 compartments instead of 4, that would trigger the death penalty offense of the rebellious elder. Gemara. Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Oshaya says, one is liable only for issuing a ruling with regard to a matter whose essence, whose basic obligation, is from matters of Torah, and whose explanation is from traditional rabbinic interpretations of the Torah, right? So like this case of the tefillin. The Torah says you have to put these words on your hand. The sages say the box in which you use to put these words on your hand has to have 4 compartments. And third element, if one added to it, one compromises his fulfillment of the mitzvah and does not satisfy his obligation. So this very particular type of requirement. So for this rebellious elder thing to apply, the law in question has to be sourced in the Torah, but what he's disagreeing with is an interpretation of the rabbis, and his dispute with the rabbis is where he's trying to add something extra that the other rabbis say is not to be added. That's the nature of the dispute, and it's only that kind of a dispute that would trigger the death penalty punishment of the rebellious elder, according to Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Oshaya. And they say, we have only one mitzvah like this. And what is that? Tefillin. Tefillin. And Rabbi Oshaya's statement is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says a rebellious elder is liable only for a matter whose essence is from matters of Torah and whose explanation is from traditional rabbinic interpretations of the Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda doesn't add the extra element, and the type of dispute that they're having is he's trying to add to the law an extra requirement or an extra object, right? Not 4 compartments, but 5. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's enough that it's sourced in the Torah, and he's disagreeing on a rabbinic interpretation to trigger the death penalty possibility. But Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Oshaya says, no, and when he disagrees, he's saying to add something else. That's why the title of today's show is 4 plus 1 equals 0. Right? 4, your tefillin is proper, and you put on tefillin in the morning, you have fulfilled your obligation to wrap tefillin in the morning. If your tefillin has 5 compartments, because you're following some rebellious elder, so then you didn't wrap tefillin. You did nothing. You might have had a nice intent, but you did nothing because your tefillin would be disqualified. It would not count as tefillin. It would not count as wrapping, and you accomplished nothing. So 4 plus 1 equals 0. and you've probably heard me say it other times, Nina and I have a writing principle, 1 + 1 = 1/2. If a character in a story has 2 motivations rather than 1, it's weaker than if he has 1 motivation. But here, 4 + 1 = 0. Okay. Okay, the Gemara asks, what do you mean only tefillin qualifies? Even according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Oshaya, that only tefillin would be a situation where you have sourced in Torah, rabbinic interpretation of what the right number of things to do is, and then a rebellious elder could come along and try to add one more. Tefillin's not the only example where that could happen, but isn't there the mitzvah of lulav on Sukkot and other species that one takes on the festival of Sukkot, whose essence is from matters of Torah, because in the Torah, we're commanded to observe Sukkot, we have to take, right, the 4 species. And what are they? A branch from the willow tree, a branch from the myrtle tree, a palm leaf or a palm branch, and the esrog, right, or the citron. So 4 species taken together. What if you took 5 species? Because you thought that would make the mitzvah even better. Did you negate the mitzvah or not? But isn't there the mitzvah of lulav and the other species that one takes on the festival of Sukkot, whose essence is from matters of the Torah, and whose explanation is from traditional rabbinic interpretations that establish the identity and the number of the 4 species enumerated in the Torah, and which includes the possibility to add other species to it. And if one added to it, one compromises his fulfillment of the mitzvah, and he does not satisfy his obligation, right? So if you on Sukkot had palm branch, willow branch, myrtle branch, and your esrog, and then you say, oh, I know, I can make this even better. I'll take a branch from a cherry tree because I want to make it even more, because I'm so dedicated to God, I want to give more to it. No, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah at all. You messed it up because you thought you knew better than the sages, right? That's what we're learning. But the Gemara is not so convinced about this. Whoa. The Gemara rejects this possibility. This is not the case. No, it's not going to be the same as the case of tefillin, where if you add a 5th compartment to the tefillin, it negates the mitzvah of tefillin. Lulav, the 4 species of the lulav, doesn't operate in quite the same way. As with regard to the mitzvah, the commandment of lulav, what do we hold? If we hold that fundamentally a lulav does not require binding of the species together in order to fulfill the mitzvah, then adding an additional species is inconsequential, as these species with which he fulfills the mitzvah stand alone, and that additional species stands alone. So it wouldn't matter. Actually, if you were holding a cherry branch in your hand while you were doing the rest of it, you wouldn't negate the mitzvah. You wouldn't add to it. You didn't make it better, right? In many ways, you made it worse, but you didn't negate it. You would still have fulfilled the mitzvah. According to this view, that's if binding the lulav is not part of the mitzvah. And if we hold rather that a lulav does require binding, that when we take the palm branch and the myrtle branch and the willow branch, and then we do bind them together with a strip from the palm branch, so that binding is itself part of the mitzvah, and now you bind that cherry branch in it, now you would have messed it up. And if we hold that a lulav requires binding of the 4 species together in order to fulfill the mitzvah, fulfillment of the mitzvah is already compromised from the outset. The rebellious elder is liable only when the object of the mitzvah was as it should be, and the addition compromised that object and disqualifies it. In this case, the object was never as it should be. That's why when we're talking about a tefillin that would be disqualified through this, conduct of the rebellious elder, it would be where you take kosher tefillin with 4 chambers, and then you add an additional chamber on the outside. So before you added to it, it was proper tefillin. Then you disqualified it by adding an additional chamber, right? With the lulav, if binding is not required, well, then the 4 are just standing alone. It doesn't matter that there's another one nearby. If binding is required and then you bound them together from the outset with an additional species, then it never was a proper lulav. That would be the difference between it and tefillin. So now the Gemara tries a different case. What about tzitzis, right? Tzitzis that I wear under my garment. 4 fringes, right, on the corners of the 4-cornered garment, known as the arba kanfot. Isn't there the mitzvah of tzitzis, whose essence is from matters of the Torah, you shall wear fringes on your garments, and whose explanation is from traditional rabbinic interpretation that establish the number of fringes. The Torah just says you will have fringes on the corners of your garments and you will put a blue thread in the fringe. So whenever you look at the fringe, you'll be reminded of all my commandments and to do them. That's the 3rd paragraph of the Shema. Okay, where does it say that there's going to be 4 threads that are, doubled over to become 8? And there's going to be, a bunch of like wraps, loops, 7, 9, what is it, 5, 7, 9 or 11 and 13. I forget the number of loops exactly. And there's going to be, 4 layers of knots. And that's according to the Ashkenaz tradition. Sephardim actually tie them differently. So it's from the rabbinic traditions that we get the number of threads and the knots. Okay? So based in matters of Torah, explanation is from traditional rabbinic interpretations that establish the number of fringes enumerated in the Torah and the number of threads in each fringe, and which includes the possibility to add fringes or threads to it. And if one did add to it, one compromises the fulfillment of the mitzvah and does not satisfy his obligation. Isn't that just like the example of tefillin? So it's not only one example. But the Gemara rejects this possibility. That is not the case. As with regard to ritual fringes, to tzitzis, what do we hold? If we hold that the upper knot is not mandated by Torah law, and one fulfills his obligation by placing the threads on the corner of the garment, these threads with which he fulfills the mitzvah are independent, and that additional thread is independent and does not compromise the fulfillment of the mitzvah. The additional string wouldn't matter. It's just an additional string nearby. But if we hold that the upper knot is mandated by Torah law, then fulfillment of the mitzvah is already compromised from the outset if you tie 5 strings instead of 4. So the Gemara challenges, well, if so, the status of tefillin is the same. If one crafts tefillin for the head with the 4 compartments, and then he brings another compartment and places it alongside them, these compartments with which he fulfills the mitzvah stand alone, and that additional compartment stands alone, and it doesn't compromise the fulfillment of the mitzvah. But if one crafts tefillin of the head with 5 compartments from the outset, then the fulfillment of the mitzvah was already compromised. So the Gemara answers, but doesn't Rabbi Zeira say, if there is an obstruction which creates an outer compartment of the tefillin of the head that is not exposed to the air, the tefillin of the head are disqualified for use in fulfillment of the mitzvah. Therefore, adding a 5th compartment to the 4 of the tefillin of the head always compromises the fulfillment of the mitzvah, but it would be after the fact. So you could have valid tefillin, and then you add another compartment, and we don't say that it just sits alongside and doesn't affect the mitzvah. We say that it would disqualify the tefillin and render the mitzvah not a mitzvah, and that's why that's the situation where we would meet the requirements, according to Rabbi Oshaya, that for the rebellious elder to be deemed a rebellious elder, it's a matter based in Torah. He disagrees with the rabbinic interpretations, traditional rabbinic interpretations surrounding that matter based in the Torah. And the manner in which he disagrees is that he would be adding on to something that is already a complete mitzvah. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Here in chapter 10, we are going to start a very short and complete Mishnah number 6. And then we'll take some questions. So questions or comments, get them in now. Mishnah 6. One does not execute the rebellious elder, neither in the court that is in his city, nor in the court that is in Yavne. This is where the Sanhedrin met after the second temple was destroyed. Rather, one takes him up to the high court in Jerusalem, and they guard him in incarceration until the pilgrimage festival, and the court executes him during the pilgrimage festival. As it is stated, and all the nations shall hear and fear and no longer sin intentionally. Deuteronomy 17:13. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda says one does not delay administering justice to this individual. Rather, the court executes him immediately like any death penalty case, and the judges write reports and dispatch agents to all the places informing them so-and-so is liable to be punished with the court-imposed death penalty for disobeying the court. And in this manner, we publicize the crime and the punishment and discourage others from doing the same. We don't actually have to make a public execution during a pilgrimage festival in Jerusalem. That's the Mishnah 6. And the Gemara, the sages taught in a baraisa, one does not execute the rebellious elder, neither in the court that is in his city, nor in the court that is in Yavne. Rather, one takes him up to the high court that is in Jerusalem. And they guard him in incarceration until the pilgrimage festival. And the court executes him during the pilgrimage festival, as it is stated, and all the nations shall hear and fear. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Akiva, is it stated, and all the nation shall see and fear? Which would indicate that the entire nation must actually witness his execution. But isn't it stated only, and all the nation shall hear and fear? Not see and fear, hear and fear. Big difference between seeing and hearing. You can hear about something that happened hundreds of miles away. You can only see something that is happening in front of you, at least in the times before TV. And even now, because I think we've all learned that video is not necessarily to be trusted. Let's continue. But isn't it stated only, and the nation shall hear and fear, indicating that merely informing the people of the execution is sufficient? Why delay administering justice to this individual? Rather, the court executes him immediately, and the judges write reports and dispatch agents to all the places, informing them so-and-so was sentenced and found liable to be punished with execution in court. And the sages taught there are 4 transgressors condemned to be executed whose verdicts require a proclamation to inform the public. One who instigates others to engage in idolatry, and the stubborn and rebellious son, and the rebellious elder, and conspiring witnesses. In all these cases, it is written concerning them and all the nation, Deuteronomy 17:13, and all Israel, Deuteronomy 13:12 and 21:21, except with regard to conspiring witnesses, where it is written, and those who remain shall hear and fear, as not everyone is fit for providing testimony. Therefore, rather than saying that all of the nation or all of Israel must be informed, only those remaining who are not disqualified from providing testimony are those who must heed the verse, hear and fear, and shall henceforth commit no more such evil in the midst of you. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 10. God willing, we'll pick it up tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, with Mishnah number 7 on page 89. Just a few questions. Sharon, as we approach Passover, I find myself thinking about the controversy of kitniyot, prohibited or not prohibited foods based on your rabbis, right? Sephardic Jews, Southern Europe, based in the Spanish Jewry, they eat kitniyot, right? Like beans, legumes, things like that is permissible to them on Passover. Ashkenazic Jews, Northern European Jews, nope, we don't eat legumes, we don't eat lentils, we don't eat rice during Passover. More than anything, there was a historical reason for that. It's pretty complicated. It had to do with the way that crops were harvested and rotated and transported. And the idea that you couldn't be sure that if you ate kitniyot in Northern Europe, that it wouldn't have some chametz, which is prohibited during Passover, mixed in with it. Not a problem in that other community. We no longer have those problems, but the law remains the law. Lucy, so if someone said 2 compartments instead of 4, that is not a problem. It is a problem, but we might not execute him according to Rabbi Oshaya. According to, who was it, Rabbi Yehuda? We would, right? That was the difference. Rabbi Yehuda says no. He's making a difference from what the Sanhedrin is saying and promoting that view and telling other people to follow his view. So we would execute him. But according to Rabbi Oshaya, only if he added on to it. So yes, you understood the difference. Sharon, would someone actually open the tefillin box to check the number of scrolls, or is it relying on the user saying, my tefillin has an extra scroll? There was, after all, some indecision as to which Torah chapters should be in the tefillin. You know, there's tremendous variety in cost of tefillin. It's never cheap, but you could spend anywhere from, a few $100s to several thousand or even many $1,000s for tefillin. What's the difference? There's the beauty and the craftsmanship. But there's also the holiness and intentionality of the person who created the tefillin. And there's a sense that, if it was created by a tremendous holy person who only, because he put so much care and intentionality into them, he can only make a few a year, very rare. That could make them so much more valuable. And another aspect of this is the reliability that this person is so holy he would never cut a corner of any sort in fabricating the tefillin. These are questions of faith and reliability and reputation, as it were. And Sharon reminding me that tzitzis, according to, I think, Ashkenaz, majority opinion, 1 knot, 7 wraps, 1 knot, 8 wraps, 1 knot, 11 wraps, 1 knot, 13 wraps. Thank you. Those are the numbers. And then in the last knot, added with the 8 strings, and the gematria of the word tzitzis equals 610, and we add 3 for the words Hashem Elohim Emes, and we come up with 613. So we look upon them and recall all the commandments, which is what we're told to do in the Shema. And when you see them, you shall do all of my commandments. You're reminded to do all my commandments. And so what Sharon just showed is that the numbers that are sort of built into the knotting of the tzitzis add up to 613, which is the number of commandments that obligate the Jewish people as a whole. Thank you. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, see you tomorrow, Friday at noon. Shabbos. Good Erev Shabbos. broadcasting. Why is it still broadcasting? Strange.